Wow, this food is amazing, Mom.
Yeah, it sure is.
Yes, Mrs. Hontus, the corn is very delicious.
SNL? More like significant no longer. Hey y'all, welcome back. If there's one piece of American TV that needs no introduction, it's SNL. The show has employed so much talent as hosts, writers, and as cast members. But despite the diversity of backgrounds, and by diversity I mainly mean the different improv troupes in Chicago the dominantly straight white cast members were once a part of, one thing has remained consistent over the years: being a bastion of liberal politics. Being a bastion? From its infant years mocking Gerald Ford, to its teen years mocking George Bush, all the way up to its geriatric years mocking Donald Trump, the show has never failed to poke fun at conservatives. Or so I thought. That's right, folks. After a 4-year obsession with mocking Donald Trump's policies, appearance, and rhetoric, today I'm going to be looking at a recent SNL skit that is shockingly pro-Trump? Part 1. The skit itself. SNL had its Thanksgiving episode last November. Will Ferrell hosted, and the skit they added to the holiday lexicon is called First Thanksgiving. In order to discuss the skit properly, I need to lay out its structure first. Link is in the description to watch their skit first, should you choose to accept it. We open on Pocahontas and her family having John Smith over for Thanksgiving dinner. John doesn't quite get that Pocahontas' family doesn't use last names, which the parents brush off, but the grandfather is pretty perturbed by. As John leaves to go to the bathroom, the grandfather makes an insensitive comment.
And thanks again for welcoming him to Thanksgiving dinner, even though he's...
A pale face?
Grandpa, that's not nice. You're being prejudiced.
When John returns, the family take turns going around saying what they're grateful for, and the grandfather expresses gratitude for their chief, who he says is strict on immigration.
And let's hope he finally builds that wall.
Grandpa?
What? We need a wall.
The family's upset by the rude comments, but John calms the situation. He once again leaves for the bathroom, which prompts the grandpa to speculate that John's stealing from them.
I'm just saying, since those illegals showed up, a lot of things have gone missing lately. Buffaloes, land.
John returns, apologizing for leaving so much, and reveals that it's because his stomach is upset. He shares as evidence that he isn't processing corn properly, a food relatively new to him. The family shares that they all too struggle to digest corn properly. Grandpa now feels a connection to John Smith and they make up. Will Ferrell then finishes off the skit by morally wrapping up.
But no matter what year it is, or what color we are, or whether we get our news from a fox or a peacock, one thing's for sure. None of us can digest corn. And that's what's important.
Part 2. Well, this seems fine so far, right? You might have noticed that the language of the skit is pretty modern, and not just that they wrote with an accidental modern vernacular, rather that the characters feel like they're alive in our present day. And that's the point. The old-timey dinner is used as a framework to explore our modern political world. It provides a way to discuss casual racism through a fresh lens. It's also a simple step to add some comedic flair to an otherwise standard skit.
So, John, Pocahontas tells us you're turning 30 soon.
Yep. Yeah. Couple of weeks.
And you do know she's 12, right?
More specifically, however, the language of casual racism is clearly meant to satirize Trump supporters. They make allusions to a talking fox giving Grandpa all his wacky ideas.
That's just so rude and offensive, Grandpa.
Yeah, where'd you even hear a thing like that?
Fox.
Grandpa, you gotta stop talking to that crazy old fox.
A fox, like the news network that... Whatever, you get the joke. Grandpa also mentions building a wall to keep the bad people out, a cornerstone of the Trump presidency and of the Trump fan club. So what is SNL's central critique in this skit? It seems to be that the casual racism directed at Latinx and Middle Eastern immigrants is harmful. When words like invasion are used by Trump and his supporters to describe migration of immigrants, it's a lie fueled by xenophobia. The migrants aren't coming with the intent to take over or destroy American values. They're trying to escape economic hardship and oppressive or corrupt governments. If one objectively looks at the size of the incoming populations and their less than advertised impact on crime rates, you can see there's no threat to national or really even local security. So on top of being xenophobic, there's an unwarranted paranoia in the platform of strict immigration. Paranoia that is fed through selective media narratives. The casual nature of this racism is not just being confused on whether to say illegal alien or immigrant, it's a series of lies that one buys into. An SNL skit conveys this message. John Smith isn't stealing from them, he's just got an upset stomach. Grandpa got his info from a fox, a stand-in for unreliable news sources, who stir up their base off misinformation. The writers are pointing out how baseless casual racism is by showing us an alternative perspective through a historical lens. The writers are saying that if we question the narratives we've been fed, we too can see we're more alike than different. And if we don't think about the skit past its initial conceit, we can walk away proud of SNL's message. But we can't just view the sketch in a vacuum. It doesn't take place in a suburban living room. It takes place in a 17th century Yehakin. The time period impacts how we perceive the messages, whether the writers wanted that or not. And their framework falls apart when we ask one simple question. Is the grandpa right? Part 3, where the skit utterly fails. Latinx and Middle Eastern immigrants are not invading us, and they do not pose a threat to our national security. But European colonizers were definitely invading the Americas and did pose a tangible threat to its native peoples. Colonizers were actively looking to steal resources, land, and subjugate peoples. That was their entire goal once they discovered the Americas. So we need to ask, was Grandpa right to not trust John Smith? Grandpa talks about diseased blankets and fears John Smith is stealing from them. The skit frames these concerns as comparable to the unwarranted paranoia of Trump supporters, but all of those things definitely happened. There's evidence of weaponized blankets, and plenty of colonizers broke treaties, many of which they coerced or forced native peoples into in the first place. Which is stealing, if you ask me. And while those practices didn't occur in Jamestown for a while after this skit takes place, due to trade routes that existed at the time, there's reason to believe the Powhatan Confederacy might have caught word of white people committing atrocities elsewhere in the Americas. Also, I'd argue that since our relationship to the Powhatan Confederacy is often symbolic of greater Native American relations, we should judge the grandpa being right or wrong off the larger history of colonialism. So no matter how I look at it, the grandpa, as a stand-in for Native peoples, was justified in being suspicious of John Smith, a stand-in for white colonizers. And even if you disagree with my conclusion, understand that this is where the skit starts to create confused readings. Allegory by its nature makes each side appear equal unless steps are taken to distinguish between the two. Likewise, with the skit we have two vastly different historical contexts being merged through dialogue and familiar situations.
Grandpa, that's not nice. You're being prejudiced.
The xenophobia in each is portrayed as analogous. From here, there are necessarily two conclusions we can draw. Either the grandpa's right to be suspicious of colonizers, and therefore Trump supporters are justified in their fears of immigrants, or Trump supporters are wrong to be so xenophobic, and so were Native Americans. And I'll get right out in front of this, both of these conclusions suck. First Thanksgiving passes itself off as a cheeky bit of holiday fun, but it's oddly sinister when you think about it like that. By drawing such clear parallels between Native American fears of colonialism, white American fears of Latinx and Middle Eastern migration, the skit is either validating the day-to-day persecution of said migrants, or it is engaging in the false historical narrative that colonizers were generally peaceful and not as nasty as those liberal elites say they were. Neither of these are correct, yet these are the messages we're left with when we stop taking the skit at its face value and analyze the framing device's impact. And what's extra weird, both messages feel like something Trump would support. Anyone living in the Americas is aware of Trump's hateful rhetoric toward Latinx and Middle Eastern migrants, but he's also a huge advocate for fondly remembering colonial figures, declaring that Columbus Day will never change its name, and that on Columbus Day we draw inspiration from this intrepid pioneer's spirit of adventure. Ah yes, the intrepid, adventure-loving pioneer who once said Native Americans would make good servants and could be subjugated to his will fairly easily. How inspirational. Given SNL's frequent mockery of Trump, it's safe to say they disagree with the man. And while smarter YouTubers than me have pointed out how SNL's benefited from a Trump presidency, that feels more at the executive level. By that I mean NBC executives might enjoy the marketability of Trump and profiting off of him being in office. But I get the feeling that the writers and performers pretty genuinely hate him. Like, I don't think Kate McKinnon's secretly crossing her fingers that Trump sticks around so she can keep making fun of him. So I feel like I have to ask, how did we end up with this pro-Trump skit? I don't think these writers were trying to send these messages. They probably just wrote a silly sketch about Native Americans and John Smith bonding over their inability to digest corn and didn't think about the implications of the sketch past that. Or at least I thought the answer was that simple, and then the ending of the skit happened. Will Ferrell doesn't just morally wrap up the skit, he cheekily acknowledges to the audience that,
And if you're anything like me, you know there's a lot of problems in this crazy, crazy sketch.
this ending is so baffling, like what? So they're fully aware that there's problems at the foundation here. If they were ignorant, that's one thing, but they tell you that they know there's reasons the sketch should be changed. And yet they didn't do anything.
I mean, white actors playing natives? What is this, 2014?
And yeah, I haven't even touched on this point yet because I was focusing on the messaging in the video, but they whitewash the Native American family. And while he only mentions how weird it is to have white people playing natives, by saying there's a lot wrong with the sketch, it makes me think they're aware of the structural mess they created. Part 4. Conclusion. I think SNL's embarrassing gaffe presents a valuable lesson. First, don't fucking cast white people to play Native Americans. But mainly, let this skit be a lesson to writers. Bodies in space have meaning, and allegory is a powerful tool, so you need to be aware of how you're using it. And also, a lesson for all the liberals out there watching, be more aware of the nuances behind critiquing Trump and his movement. This is one of countless moments I've seen over the last few years that miss the mark on aptly critiquing the guy. You can't just say his phrases back at him in a silly voice and think you destroyed his career. We need to deconstruct his xenophobic rhetoric so that the American populace can see it for the hateful bigotry that it is, which is a completely different project. Anyway, thank y'all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to throw me a like and subscribe down below, clicking the little bell so you can know the exact nanosecond I release my next video. Also be sure to follow me on Twitter because I post funny jokes there sometimes. Any other weird and problematic SNL sketches come to mind? I can remember a few touchy sketches, but that's for a later video. Thanks y'all, and I'll see you next time.